Hello and welcome to the video. This is my video on this thing here. This is the new radio from FrSky or FrSky, however you want to say it. This is the X9 Lite. Now, for those of you that know the channel quite well, you'll know that I have literally hundreds of videos showing you how to do things on the FrSky radios and OpenTX. OpenTX is a jolly complicated operating system and can be very confusing for an awful lot of pilots. But FrSky have been working to combat some of the competition that they've been getting recently from people like Jumper, and this radio is between about 60 and 70 pounds depending where you get it from. Now, I've got this one from Banggood. I'll put a link down below. Banggood also sent me a coupon code as well, so that hopefully will save you a couple of bucks. But what I want to do in this video was, after playing with this for a couple of weeks, is kind of give you my feedback, what it is. The radio, I'm guessing, is kind of aimed at those people who are coming into the hobby or when money is particularly tight. There are a lot of bind and fly style models coming out now with FrSky receivers, and the ability to get a cheap and cheerful radio to start out is a really nice idea. The great thing is, because this shares an awful lot in common with the other FrSky radios, then you can add loads and loads of different models on here. So maybe we'll start to see this being bundled in ready to fly kind of configurations with a bind and fly model and one of these. That would be quite nice. It's one of those radios that you could keep for a couple of years and keep upgrading. So what I'll do in this video is, let me just play the unboxing video while I talk about it. So this radio is a little bit smaller and a little bit lighter than the standard X9D Plus radio that you think it's a mini version of. It is an awful lot smaller, awful lot lighter, and has an awful lot less controls, even less controls than the X7S. The screen itself is very reminiscent of the X7S or the QX7, and the navigation is a little bit different. There's the same three buttons on the left hand side that will be very familiar to those of you that know the bigger X9D Plus radio, and this time it's a scroll wheel on the right hand side, which makes navigation very, very quick indeed. They've not wasted any money at all on the packaging. It's very, very basic, to say the least. You don't get an SD card that you're going to need, so you're going to have to order one of them. You only need a couple of gigs worth of SD card to put all the files on. You're going to have to do that bit of setup yourself. And apart from the radio, the only thing you get in the package is a little bit of paper. You can't call it a manual, it's nowhere near a manual. And also the little kind of gimbal protectors that are in there to protect it during shipping. So let me jump onto the bench and let me kind of go through the controls in a little bit more detail and show you what's actually on here and show you how the navigation works for OpenTX. So just before we get through this in detail, let me kind of show you what it's like in comparison to its two parents, because it does kind of feel like the X9D and the X7S were locked in a room overnight with some Barry White, and this was the result, because it is kind of a very much smaller version. So first of all, let me show you, put this one out of the way, my trusty X7, and bring both of these radios in. So this one on the left is my daily driver. This is one I use all the time. This is my X9D Plus. I've had it for about 4 years. Upgraded the gimbals. I put a 6-position switch on it. It's amazing for things like crossfire, and it is used pretty much all the time. I usually have to move the models around because the memory is always kind of getting very full. And you can see, hopefully, that the new radio is significantly smaller than that one. So although at first glance, you know, the detail up here makes it look like it's basically the same mold, but they've just used a different plastic, this is substantially smaller. Again, the navigation buttons are the same on the left hand side, but we have a roller replacing these buttons on the right hand side, and I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. These buttons in particular over time can eventually get pushed through and make navigation difficult, and you have to take the back off. If I bring in the X7S, which is the other parent, then you can see that it's an awful lot thinner than the X7S. The gimbals are very standard FrSky fare. Navigation, again, this one has the scroll wheel. They're essentially the same three buttons as we have over here. The screen is pretty much identical. So if I fire both of these up...
Welcome to OpenTX. Welcome to OpenTX. Switch warning. Throttle warning.
Lots and lots of warnings. You can kind of get an idea that the screen layout shares much more with the QX7 than it does with the X9D Plus. So now we've kind of got through that, let's talk about what's actually on this radio. So we have pretty standard non-Hall effect gimbals. The tension on this, hopefully you can hear this on the camera. They have got the kind of ratchet on slightly on the throttle. The tension's pretty nice. These are the kind of gimbals that we were getting in the early days of the Taranis, and you know what? They work fine. They're not particularly anything to write home about, and if you've used the later, more expensive gimbals, you're a bit spoilt. But for a new pilot, these are absolutely fine. Push button for power on. The little connection for a lanyard is looks like a plastic piece, so hopefully that won't snap. I don't use a lanyard, so I haven't really tested it. Trims for the 4 main controls. We have the navigation buttons, as I said, roller buttons. We have a 2-position switch on this shoulder. This is a momentary switch on here. We have 1 rotary control, whereas things like the QX7 have 2. We have then 3-position switches in every other position. Now that is quite a bit different from some of the other radios, but it is a very similar layout to the QX7, where it has a 2-position switch in here and a momentary switch. So if you went from this to something like a QX7, then it would feel very familiar. You'd be kind of reaching for the switches in the same places. For me, it's a little bit different because I tend to use the shoulder switches on here. This is my mode switch in this corner, and then this I tend to use for arming. They're both 3-position switches, and you can see there's an awful lot more switch gear on the full X9D Plus. Turning it over, the fun continues. So we have the module bay, which is under here. Not a JR style bay, it's the proprietary FrSky one. So if you have one of the R9 or those kind of things, that'll pop in there. And then under this battery hatch, which has a very, very stiff catch, so you need to have your Weetabix, you have the power supply. Power is provided by 2 18650 cells. You need the ones that have a dome top, otherwise they won't make the electrical connection in the middle. And that is quite a nice idea, but it does mean that hopefully you're going to have some kind of charger for 18650 batteries. Navigation is very similar to all the other models. So if you press the menu and then the page button, you have all the standard OpenTX stuff that you've probably seen in a million of my videos. And again, if you're not familiar with OpenTX and you want to know how to get to grips with OpenTX on a radio like this, go and watch my OpenTX Mix School. It starts from the absolute basics. To get into the system menu, you press and hold menu, and then you can page across as well. And in here you can do things like actually run the spectrum analyzer. There it is, running away. If I turn on one of the other radios, does it see it?
Welcome to OpenTX.
Let's just bring it in.
Switch warning.
I really need to move that switch, don't I? Ooh, look at that. Yeah, okay. Yep, you can definitely see the difference between the radio being turned on and off. If I turn this off, there we go. It gets an awful lot quieter in here. That's all part of the other thing that's here. You'll notice it says Access on the front. So Access is the new protocol from FrSky, and it has lots of additional advantages over the older protocol. The radio itself only ships with the Access protocol by default, but you can put D16 on it very simply and easily, and that means that you can bind to X series receivers. A lot of the bind and fly models that are coming these days tend to come with either D16 or one of the little X series receivers, one of the little thumbnail size ones. Some of them come with D8. Now D8 isn't legal to sell in the European Union, so I guess that kind of makes sense why D8 isn't available on radios like this, because that means that they would be illegal to sell. And the FCC in America seem to be really clamping down on equipment that can transmit on illegal frequencies, particularly things like FPV. So I guess it makes sense to make sure that out the box you can't get into trouble. So let me very quickly talk about the update process, because when you get it, it'll only have Access on here. If you want to get to D16, so you can use the X series receivers and use bind and fly stuff that uses the D16 protocol, there are a number of hoops that you have to jump through. Now, to get the most out of the radio, you are going to have to download and copy the SD card contents onto the separate SD card that you have to go out and buy before you plug it into the radio. If you don't have an SD card in there, then things like the wizard setup stuff won't work and the sounds won't work either. So you need to do that. But you also potentially, if you want the latest and greatest stuff from FrSky, you have to download a couple of updates. Now, there's updates for the power module, there's updates for the internal transmitter, and there's also an update for the installed version of OpenTX, and you can get those from the FrSky website. You can then copy the relevant files across onto your SD card, and then you have to go through several steps. First of all, you have to update the version of OpenTX on the radio. So hold the two trims into the middle, power it up, go into the right firmware, and then select that, and that will then update the OpenTX version. Then you got to copy across the file that will update the internal transmitter electronics as well. And then once you've done both of those pieces, next time you power up the radio, it will give you the ability to access D16. So after playing with this for a couple of weeks, what do I think? Well, I do like the idea of the access protocol. It's one of those things that's kind of like Marmite or Vegemite. People seem to love it or hate it. I don't have any strong opinion. I haven't really had enough chance to play with it yet. But the idea of automatic update, automatic binding, better anti-interference technology, up to 24 channels, the ability to bind 3 receivers to one radio, the ability to bind 1 receiver to multiple radios, is all really great flexible technology. Most of that stuff has been kicking around already in TBS Crossfire anyway, but it'd be great to have it on this kind of stuff. I do like the idea that for a £60–70 radio, you still get access to all of the FrSky goodness. And I guess that's kind of the point of this, is that by getting a pilot early in their career, then as the pilot moves on and they want another radio, then they're going to go onto another FrSky radio. But if we look inside, for example, the internals are very much standard FrSky internals with lots of twisted cables. And if you compare it to things like the inside of the Jumper T16, the Jumper T16 looks like a very much more a modern radio. But this is probably easier to work on because it's all discrete plugs and all discrete wires rather than lots of little ribbon cables. There are enough switches on here for the majority of pilots. If you're going to have an arming switch, a beeper, maybe a flip, for things like beta flight and basic planes, this is going to be great. It would have been nice to have one more rotary control, but that's things like pan and tilt and stuff like that I tend to use a lot on the planes that I fly. But everything on here is just enough for a new pilot to get to grips with the technology and get flying. I do like the scroll wheel. Having used this for a little while, I do like the scroll wheel anyway for navigation. It's something that I got used to back in the days of Spectrum radios. Yes, I am that old. But the scroll wheel is really nice and very intuitive and seems quite robust. The gimbals are fine. They're nothing to write home about, but they're reasonably smooth. I am disappointed there's no way to access the tension or the ratchet on the throttle. I don't like the ratchet, so to take the tension off, you have to undo the 4 screws at the back and go into the radio. And for lots of new pilots, that is going to feel like taking their engine apart on their new car. So it would have been nice maybe to have a couple of ports here at the back covered by plastic or something that you could just pop off to do that, to make that easier to adjust. Couple of things to think about though. First of all is it does feel a little bit plasticky. You can probably see on the video that the plastics look quite cheap. They're not as nice as on the other radios in the range, but I'm guessing they're trying to hit a price point here. The ratchet and the tension on the gimbals I think is a little bit wrong. It's a bit heavy. It's a personal thing, of course. Things like having the ratchets on the throttle is probably going to be great for a new pilot. It's going to help them move the rudder without moving the throttle all the time. But like I say, the ability to not being able to change those easily is a little bit of an oversight. It would have been a couple of holes in the back of the case, and the back of the case has nothing on it anyway. You have to be careful with the 18650 batteries. You do need the ones with a dome top, otherwise they don't make the connection. Oh, while we're on the subject of the 18650s, I think we have a problem potentially with the QA with these radios. The polarity stuff that was actually embossed into the tray for my 18650s on this particular radio was backwards. So I installed my batteries and couldn't get it to fire up. and then started to take it apart to figure out what the heck was going on and realized that it was actually backwards. Now, luckily, that didn't blow the radio up. However, that should have been picked up in a QA check. I can't see a QA sticker on here, so if you get one of yours, double check that the connections are the right way round. Just have a look and peer through the ends of the 18650 holder to see which end has the red wire on. If it's not clear, then unfortunately you're going to take the back off and just double check it. The connection for the power onto the main board is a standard 2S balance plug from a LiPo, so just be careful of that. I've got a little bit of a constant hissing. I thought it was because the volume was too loud, so I turned that down. When it's in operation, it does hiss like a little snake. None of my other FrSky radios do that. It seems to work fine and doesn't seem to be a problem, but it's one of those kind of annoying things in a quiet room when you're doing setup. It's there kind of going away all the time. But the last two things are really about talking about who this radio is probably aimed at. If it's a £60–70 radio, as I said at the beginning, it's really aimed at those who are coming into the hobby, who are making their first forays into radio control and are looking for a radio that's from a brand that seems to be well known. There's lots of videos on. Because of that, I think the omission of D16 was a major oversight. And personally, I don't think you should have to spend 15–20 minutes trying to update firmware and things to get the D16 protocol on here. I know it's fixed, it's in the firmware, it's on here, but that is something that should have been there out of the box. The people who are going to get this radio are going to be new pilots, and OpenTX can be overwhelming for people that have been in the hobby for a very long time. So asking a new pilot for job one to be able to bind it to their bind and fly model that they bought with it, to then go and download and update the files as I've just shown, is just too much. Come on, FrSky, step up for this stuff. Similarly with OpenTX. The OpenTX wizards are here, but they're standard OpenTX wizards. Again, OpenTX needs to step up and make like an OpenTX simple overlay. Maybe it's a Lua script, I don't know what that could look like, for a new pilot that steps them through the process, that makes it completely simple. So when you do a multi-rotor setup, it gives you an arming switch, it gives you a beeper switch, it gives you a mode switch, and all that stuff is set up in the documentation. Then you could show how that needs to be set up in Betaflight to make stuff fly. Similarly with the iNav, similarly with a plane, walk them through the mid-channel position, walk them through servo travel, walk them through adding expo. This, if it's aimed at new pilots, is going to confuse most of them, and FrSky as usual are going to rely on the community to help everybody else out. So I'm probably going to end up doing a video about what to do when you get your new X9 Lite, because lots of people are going to be stuck, and that should have been thought about out the box. My feeling on this is I guess this is just to combat all of that competition from people like Jumper, but with a bit of extra thought, FrSky and OpenTX could have made the perfect beginner radio that got people into the hobby, got them flying, having a great experience, and made them FrSky pilots for life. But you're still going to have to spend half a day watching videos on YouTube to try and figure out how to use it. And that, for a lot of people, is just going to be too high a bar. Thanks for watching the video and watching right to the very end. You can find me in all the usual places on social media. And if you like the video and like what I'm doing here, then hit the subscribe button and hit the bell notification icon too. If you really like what I'm doing, you can go the extra mile and become one of my Patreons for access to me directly for support, and also giveaways and regular updates too. If you're looking for particular content, then check out the playlist. I organise all of my videos into playlists, so if you're looking for a particular topic, you can find everything here. If it's called Introduction To, it's designed to start very simply and build on that simple introduction to teach you all about it. If it's called For Beginners, then that is really aimed at people who are brand new to that part of the hobby. You can also search on YouTube for anything that you're interested in using the search function at the top. So iNav Painless 360 will find all of my videos and even the playlist around iNav. So thanks again for watching, and happy flying.